Hello and welcome to this special event on Elemental, an introduction to the Future Leaders programme. Future Leaders is an industry-wide initiative designed, as the name suggests, to promote and develop the next generation of leaders and influencers. Those who will be responsible for addressing the emerging skills gap in green technologies, mainstreaming low carbon, achieving climate goals. There's a lot to do, and they'll be delivering against sustainability objectives in years and for years to come. The initiative is supported by Actuate UK, APHC, Bathroom Manufacturers Association, Corgi, Builders Merchants Federation, the ECA, Elemental, Ground Source Heat Pump Association, Heat Pump Association, Heat Pump Federation, Installer, MCS, SustMeme, Trustmark, and your navigator. Your chair for the next 60 minutes. That's me. My name's Jim McClelland, founder and editor SustMeme, home to both the magazine and the top 500 rankings. Joining me today on the panel are Eoin Rippin, Chief Executive MCS, Lee Rawlinson, Director of Regulated Industry at the Environment Agency, Richard Cartlidge, Director Your Navigator, and Eoin McManus, MD Elemental and Installer. It's all live with Q&A to finish, so pop your questions in the Q&A box, which you should see probably at the bottom of your screen. If you're on laptops, you pose them, I'll ask them, they'll answer them. So a bit about Elemental. This webinar forms part of a program hosted and produced by them, Elemental, www.elementalexpo.com. It's the online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. You will find a full diary of events on the website, range of upcoming webinars, and you can also view the back catalogue, broad range of hot topics, all available on demand, who's who of great speakers, and everything is free to access. So by way of a very brief intro from me, because we have a lot to cover today, we at SustMeme are delighted to support the launch of the Future Leaders Programme. Why? Because leadership is everywhere, or to be more precise, lack of leadership is everywhere. The many articles I write for reports in the middle of the Times and Sunday Times newspapers, countless conference plenaries, seminars, now webinars, chaired and facilitated down the years. There's hardly an instance where the issue's not been raised. A leadership void is a common complaint in business and industry. Now, in some cases, of course, the leadership in question has to come from government, global, central, regional, local. However, sectors and companies, professions and trades are all crying out for leadership. Visionary, strategic leadership, but also empathetic, equitable, diverse, and inclusive leadership, especially in the face of a climate emergency. Leadership's embedded in our culture. The very fact, like it or not, on social media, society rewards influencers and values followers, tells its own story. Leadership matters. So to kick off the session, we'll be getting into a range of issues from diversity to climate change, but I'd like to ask Eoin McManus about the role of Elemental and Installer first in facilitating the Future Leaders Initiative. So Eoin, from your perspective, what demand for leadership are you seeing from your audience, and how can the Elemental community, backed by the established Installer brand, provide a platform for this?
I think the leadership issue, the whole need for leadership is brought about by the sheer scale of the challenge that's facing us. If you look at over the next decade and beyond, there's an awful lot of work to be done and huge challenges to be undertaken. So I think the need for leadership will be key to drive, simply because of the speed with which this has to happen. And I think that there certainly is innovation within the industry, but I think there will be a whole generation of leaders that will need to take this forward and really develop the programs and make sure that they deliver on what they need to. Elemental is a brand that we developed about 1.5 years ago, which looked at, we already had the Installer brand, which was very much practical. It was very much looking at the men and women who install the products, whether that's a heating product or plumbing, but we didn't have a lot of association with the developers of those products, or the innovators, or the people that were actually designing and specifying, the consultants, the mechanical engineers. So it's almost the other side of the equation. So we had the practical, now we have the theoretical when we bring it together. So that's how they sit, the businesses sit. And I think going forward, this is a great story, and we are a media brand. And so as this story, and it is an exciting story, develops going forward, it's going to be our job to get the information out there and get people really engaged with it and really recruit these leaders that we need to take us forward.
Great. And I'm hearing about innovation and scale, principle and practice. Of course, we are in Zoom land today. So could I just ask you one extra couple of questions? One about communication. How has lockdown perhaps changed the way audiences like yours interact, and how has it intensified the need for access to digital resources and connectivity industry-wide?
From our perspective, from our business perspective, Installer Magazine existed for the best part of 30 years. And as of January 1st, it ceased to be as a print publication. And that was something that was always on the cards, probably, if you were to ask me a year pre-pandemic, I would have said that's probably a journey we were going to do over 2 or 3 years. And now we've actually, the pandemic has actually accelerated us. And I think initially when we got into the digital pivot, and we introduced festivals, which were virtual festivals or online webinars, similar to what we're doing right now. And the uptake was, very low in terms of the numbers, but it was gradual. And since then, we have installed, between Installer and Elemental, we probably staged close to 70 webinars across both the brands. And the numbers are going up and up all the time. So this is clearly a route to market, the digital platforms in all different ways. And the nice thing about digital is it's not just one thing. There's multiple channels. And I think digital serves the needs of people where they are and when they want it. And I think that's really been important. And I think that will be very crucial going forward. And the type of platform that we're having today is just indicative of how things will be. And it's immediate as well. People can, and people can interact with this going on as well, which is great for feedback in terms of what we're actually trying to do. But I think it's an exciting time, to be honest.
Excellent. And then lastly, one quick word. Obviously, one assumes physical events, for example, will return. So finally, looking a bit further ahead, how do you see the program progressing in terms of building on the engagement you have at Elemental and Installer going forward?
Well, the Installer show is scheduled now to go at the 28th, 29th, and 30th of September of this year. And at that time, future leaders will come together in some live form. So the work that we're doing with future leaders now is obviously virtual on these platforms, but it's nice to come together in some kind of format or some kind of live format in September. And then going forward into 2022, there's plans now to launch the Elemental Expo in 2022, which again is taking virtual engagement and putting it on a live stage. And I think the important thing about looking at digital and looking at events is that we have 365-day engagement. And I think that's important because an exhibition is not just about the 3 days you spend at the show. There has to be a follow-up. And digital actually really provides that continued engagement, which I think is going to be key to getting these messages out and getting people really engaged with what we're trying to do here.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ian, for joining us today, and obviously to Elemental for helping facilitate the Future Leaders program. Thank you for your time and your answers and insights. And now, as we start to explore both the issues and the inspirations for future leaders, I'm going to be starting by asking our 3 panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit more about the initiative and their involvement. So firstly, Ian Rippin. Ian, from the perspective of a representative body, what was the motivation behind this Future Leaders program? How did it all come about?
Well, yeah, thank you, Jim, and thank you for a fantastic introduction. Actually, I think you've covered some of the motivation for why we wanted to do this as a group. So Lee, Richard, and I have worked together before, and we still want to work together going forward, which is a good thing. But I think we've been reflecting on the enormity of the challenge, and actually, it is the greatest leadership challenge of our time: the fight against climate change. Which has been crystallized into net zero by 2050. And it's a leadership challenge because I think our experience tells us that the ingredient that you need to get right is leadership, and bringing everybody together around a single vision and a passion. And a strong leader provides that direction, mentorship, and the right culture, really. So we thought, well, why not instill all of that good stuff into a program? And actually, as today's leaders, we're all in a leadership position, privileged to be in a leadership position. We have an obligation to make sure that the future leaders are coming through, the conditions are right. And I think over the last holiday break, over Christmas, I was reflecting that by 2050, I'll be in my 80s. So it won't be me that's taking the baton over the line. It'll be those that are in their 20s and in their 30s. So, and I was reflecting back, it's a long time ago, Jim, but I was reflecting, actually, what would I have wanted in my 20s and in my 30s when I thought I could lead an organization? And it came down to be, I wanted to be engaged, I wanted to be inspired, I wanted to be involved, I wanted access to my managers because I was envious of all those contacts. But I actually wanted permission to be part of something. And that's what Future Leaders is for me.
Excellent, thank you. And Lee, if I could bring you in as a regulator, why Future Leaders? What's the strategic imperative? Why do we urgently need to plan for tomorrow today?
Hi, Jim. Thank you. And echo Ian's thoughts there, really, that, we do need a generational solution to some of these things. This is the biggest problem. Climate change is the biggest problem that faces the country, bigger than COVID, bigger than anything else. And we need those generational solutions to it. So as Ian said, 10 years from now, there'll be people who will need that baton to run through. As a regulator, I'm seeing the speed of innovation quicker than ever now in terms of people looking for solutions to problems that exist or emergent. The climate emergency has driven the pace of innovation much faster than ever. And actually, the leadership messages that are out there, the leadership communities need to evolve at that pace or better. So what this program really for us was to try and kickstart that next generation, kickstart, as Ian said, when we started out on our journeys, the things that we would like to know. So the younger generation are fantastic at getting heard. They use systems and networks that we are trying to just get to grips with, the social media aspects. They're much more adept at some of that. And people talk about leadership, and we often struggle. What is leadership? We're always all doing leadership in one form or another, whether it's intended or not. And getting the younger generation to understand the impacts that they can have, that how they can start to influence, but equally understand some of the limitations and the problems that face us at the moment in terms of society. The climate emergency and driving the climate aspect is really, really important, but you also have to look at the social and the economic aspects of where we're getting to. And it's really important you get harmony across all those pieces. So it's critical that we do something now. It's critical that we should have done something even sooner, best time to plant a tree. But by focusing on the future aspects of it, getting those 20s to 30s, we want to help share the problems that we kind of face in our industries, what I see across the whole of the country in terms of its business strategy around the climate emergency, around regulation, around waste, around installations, activities, all of that work. Getting them to understand the problems we face, why we face those problems, and what can they do now to ensure that it's a smoother transition 10 years for them so that they get an easier ride and become our allies of the future.
Excellent. And as you say, it's about obviously creating the desire for those roles, but also it's about the delivery. And on exactly that point, Richard, what does the program content look like? What will it actually deliver?
Thanks, Jim, and good afternoon, everybody. So the program itself we've designed is a 9-month program in the first instance, and there's 3 phases to that. We've got the foundation phase, the application phase, and the aspiration phase. So in the foundation phase, in the first 3 months, the aim is to equip leaders with 3 essential leadership practices. So these are tried and tested in programs that I've run previously. And the 3 things that will equip leaders with is how to make capacity, so they make time and space to lead. How can they think differently, because we're going into uncharted territory, and how do they empower others? So empowering other people is the key thing that leaders do to get as many people working on the project as they can. The application phase, so after that first 3 months, we're going to a 6-month phase, and the group will be invited to deliver a project for carbon zero over a 6-month period, as I say, and there'll be input from speakers, possible site visits, whether they're virtual or in person, depending on how circumstances allow us to do that. And then after they graduated at the end of that 9-month period, there's an aspiration phase. And that really is launching these leaders into the future as an alumni and a network of peers who, from cross-organisation, cross-sector, cross-backgrounds, who are equipped and charged, ready to deliver the challenges that we're talking about.
Excellent, thank you. And now I think in this phase of the webinar, we're going to talk about inspirations, but first in the middle, I'd like to talk about some of the issues with you. Actually, I'd like to zoom in on some of the specifics and the challenges, dig a bit deeper, you know, if we're going to look at what the changes and fixes are that are needed here, especially in the UK. In short, what are the problems? What can we do about them? So first up, and I have to say, International Women's Day was yesterday. The founding individuals happen to mean on this one-off event, we have an all-male panel. So Lee, the first thing I'm going to ask you about is diversity. To be frank, the likes of construction, utilities industries, they face a skills shortage, but there's something of an image problem when it comes to attracting and retaining a diverse mix of talent. How can future leaders help address this going forward, Lee?
Yeah, and I'm really happy that, you know, that's a question, Jim, and it's something I'd encourage people to challenge and push within their own organisations. Diversity is absolutely critical to the success of it, and it's one of the key values of the work that we pull together. Yes, we happen to be 3 colleagues and 3 friends that kind of brought this together, but its purpose was because of the lack of diversity around some of the thinking and some of the approaches and the communities that we work with. There are some wonderful diverse communities out there, don't get me wrong, that are working already in a climate world and the climate agenda. This panel today is not to try and talk about the climate change stuff. Future panels will address some of that, and we will have good inspirational role models across the whole piece. But we are what we are as the 3 of us who set this up, and they're in great partnership with Elemental. But diversity comes in many forms. So gender obviously being one, but BAME another, the Black Asian minority ethnicity. We need to make sure that the sector actually has a better understanding, a better brand, and a better value. Having a greater diverse community is only beneficial to your business. But there are many other aspects to diversity. So myself, I'm hugely proud to be on the LGBT plus network for the Environment Agency and to support the civil service on its LGBT plus work. That aspect of diversity is really, really important to us, because there are communities out there that can connect better to customers, can connect better to society, to make sure that we understand the people that we need to work with. And back onto the climate aspect of this, you know, this is a wicked problem. It needs an integrated solution. It needs multiple faceted solutions to this. It's going to be a community aspect that will drive this forward, not a government legislative one. There'll be aspects of that, but it'll need everybody's involvement. So the diversity bit is really critical for us. The whole programme will be built in around with diversity at its heart of its community. We want to make sure then that the businesses understand the value of diversity and how we can raise even more of that within those communities. So as Richard talked about, you know, the site visits, the site meetings, we'll be bringing that back into individual organisations. Attendees will help work with other organisations to really raise that. So again, one of the solutions or one of the aspirations is 10 years from now, we don't have to have this level of conversation, because we are really kickstarting some of the diverse approach in leadership going forward.
Excellent, thank you, Lee. And critical issue, and I already also see questions coming in, and I would remind the audience that use the Q&A button and add them in, and we're looking forward to engaging on a whole range of issues in the last, say, 15-20 minutes. Richard, bottom line, so talked about in our industry, how will the programme benefit both the individuals looking for career advancement, that perhaps is the obvious bit, and their current employers who are wanting a return on their investment in human resource? What's the win-win with future leaders?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I mean, the the superficial answer to that would be, you know, can people afford not to invest in leadership and leadership development? But that's probably got no substance to it. So two answers really. So individuals and employers. I think individuals who drawn to the program want to take part on it, what they will get from it is they will be equipped with a suite of skills that will make them stand out in any context. So if they're thinking about their careers, if they're thinking about where they want to be in 5, 10, 15 years time, and we're hoping they'll be CEOs of organizations and leading them through with this mindset of adapting and mitigating climate change, they'll be equipped for that. I think the other thing individuals will get, which is one of my favorite leadership thoughts, words, context, is perspective. So individuals will have a perspective about themselves, about their organization, and the bigger picture of their role in the future. So they'll be able to have that perspective on what's going on for them, their organizations in terms of climate change, which isn't going anywhere, is it? And then for employers, that's probably the important bit in terms of people who might be sponsoring this, in terms of giving people's time, if not their money as well, to put people on the program. I'd always say the world needs great leaders. It's kind of why I do what I do, because I want to see people being their brilliant best. Everyone has the potential and opportunity to be a great leader. So people who are the employees of these people, their employees will have access to a network of peers. So they'll get that perspective from other organizations and other sectors in terms of what's going on. They'll be supporting a growing culture of collaboration within their organization. So if you've got some high potential leaders in your organization that are getting this sort of input, they're going to leak that back into their organization. And I encourage people to do that. You know, the training is multiplied if people take this stuff back to their organization and start doing it there straight away. So the organization benefits there. And of course, there's a specific thing of the projects that we hope people will deliver. So some organizations might have an agenda of things that they want to see delivered. This can be the melting pot, the thinking ground, where they can come and develop those projects and deliver them for the organization with some real value for money and return on investment.
Excellent, good point, good point. And Eoin Rippin, in the last of these more challenging topics, reinventing the wheel, there are other leadership initiatives already out there. We know this, yet there's unanswered questions, unsolved problems remaining. So what's different about future leaders? In short, what's the program's USP?
Well, really great challenging question. There are certainly lots of leadership programs out there, and I've done some, and I leave others to determine whether they've been successful or not. But I think our aspiration was to bring a cohort together and get them to go through a process together. So this isn't about classroom, sat on your own, learning from Rich, although that would be beneficial. Actually, you're going to go through this process of applying what you're learning, and you're learning it in quite an interesting way. Some of the things that Rich does can make you really think about your own personal style, emotional intelligence, and all those things we know part of a leadership program. But it's really setting that aspiration. You know, the fight against climate change and achieving net zero by 2050. We want this group to come together and think about that at the heart of their leadership journey. So there's lots of exciting things in this program. As I said right at the beginning, my first answer about accessing the network, I was always envious of my leaders' network and think, how can I tap into that? You know, what's that all about? So we're going to be tapping into our networks, and the people that have stood up and shown their support for this program has been overwhelming. Actually, the people are seeing the need for it, and we're going to be using those organisations to add content and add to the aspiration of the whole thing going forward. So yeah, it is different. It brings all that together.
Excellent, good point. Yeah, any aspirations towards having a position of authority begins with access. You've got to get in the door. You've got to get access.
Permission to play.
Exactly. And so from the issues to the inspirations, you know, this is reasons to be cheerful, as the song says. So a concluding focus on the positives now. I'd like to just look at how future leaders might, what's the best case scenario, successfully help us transform business culture, drive the agenda, hit some of these critical targets. So in turn, Richard, first, values. Talk to me about inclusion, collaboration, and of course, results.
Yeah, so taking each of those in turn, if I can, Jim, you just mentioned access, actually. That's a nice segue into inclusion, isn't it? I don't think climate change has prejudice. I'm sure there's a lot we could talk about that for the rest of the afternoon, but actually every sector, every organisation, every background is going to be affected by climate change. So it's really important that a key value is inclusion. A good friend of mine said to me last year, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. So the value behind this programme is that we are choosing to invite people from every background, every sector to contribute. We don't know who's going to have the best answer or the best solution to climate change. It's going to be a joint effort, but we want everyone to contribute. So inclusion is that key value that drives it. Collaboration as a second quality. The problem's too big for anyone to solve. Climate change is too big a problem for any one individual to solve. No one organisation is going to have the monopoly on the solution, I don't think. So therefore it's going to be a joint effort. So we need leaders who understand and practice collaborations. That's a key part of the programme content that we're developing. And then finally, results. There's no point in doing a leadership program for the fun of it. I get a lot of satisfaction and fun out of doing leadership programs, but there's no value at all if there's no results and we don't see some tangible progress towards mitigating and adapting to climate change and starting to get to that carbon net zero by 2050. So results has to be one of the values that we live to. Absolutely,
thank you. And I think one of the words I'm very keen pushing at the minute is the idea of climate justice, because I think justice brings in a lot of these. You see that used a lot in the US, perhaps drawing on their human rights tradition, and a lot of academic courses have that kind of perspective as well. And I think we'll increasingly use that kind of language in terms of social equity as well as environmental discrimination and migration, which we're already seeing as impacts and consequences, if you like. And so Ian Rippin, influence, mentioned that earlier. So what actual leverage can the programme hope to achieve looking ahead?
Well, a lot. I think that there's a reason why we've given it the subtitle, the sub-brand, if you like, this is a low carbon world. So we're hoping that future leaders who go through this programme learn about collaboration, work on something together, but then form a group that can contribute to the debate. And it shouldn't be left to people like me, frankly. You know, I've been in my position now for 2 years, and I've experienced a sector that is coming of age, I think, in the small scale renewables area. But there are lots of voices that are not yet heard, and we need to bring them out. So I think that policymakers, leaders, really great leaders listen. And they need to be listening to this next generation of future leaders. So we are creating something that we hope will last beyond the year and way into the future. You know, leaders are great at joining the dots, finding the right relationships to form and collaborating. So we're going to bake that into the programme, hence why we call it the New Voices in a Low Carbon World.
Excellent. And finally, before we go to Q&A, and the questions are beginning to stack up now, there's some good ones in there, looking forward to that. So finally, before the Q&A then, Lee, climate emergency. So how will future leaders turn the carbon zero ambition into action? Walk the talk is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so what we want to do is, bring together the networks, bring together all those people and the problems that they kind of face, but show what that changing landscape is like, what the climate emergency is going to be. Now, whether you believe in climate change or not is almost taboo. The fact is, enough people do. Governments are changing, policies are changing, the world is changing. Many of your customers will be changing because of the actions around the carbon zero world. Now, where is everybody's business in that? As a head of regulation, I'm seeing different responses across different sectors. I can see some sectors that sort of like say, okay, the world is changing. Where are we going to have to be on this? How do we get ahead of the curve and ensure that our business is sustainable and that our business is resilient to some of the changes that are coming? We're going to help bring that to life. But what we're not going to do is, because it's a wicked problem, I say, is tell everybody what the answers are. What we're trying to do is upskill and enable all the attendees, all the organizations, so that they can understand their sectors, their business, and bring in the bespoke solutions that really mean something to them, so that they will get actual positive actions of what that means to their business, what they will need to change doing that. Just to put it in a bit of context, the legislative change that will come across an organization, across the country, it will bring about 40% of the changes needed to get to net zero. another 50% comes from cultural and legislative change together. So, you know, the fact that we're not buying electric cars after 2030, that's because carbon assets tend to have a 20-year lifespan. So by 2050, the last petrol car will be sold by 2030, and then by 2050, it will have come to end of life. So we've got to have that. So what does that mean for all these businesses that are out there, and how will that become real? This program will bring climate change to life to everybody, from whether you're a massive organization with shareholders or whether you're a smaller run business that needs to understand how you can get ahead of this change that's inevitable.
Excellent. Thank you. So now then, this is when we open matters up to the virtual floor with our live Q&A, and we've got a real string of questions coming in. Keep them coming. You pose them, I'll ask them. Ian, Lee, Richard and Ian, I'll answer them. Right. We've got some big, almost philosophical ones. We've also got some quick fire ones. So unless it looks like they're really directed towards an individual, if I throw them out and somebody waves a hand, let's do one or two of the quick ones to begin with. So Pippa Palmer asks, are you looking for academic partners to join the cohort or help develop curriculum, or both? Academic partners.
Good question.
Ian.
Sorry, I jumped in and answered it, Jim.
No, that's it. Do it. No, do so, please.
We're looking for future leaders who might be working in academia or be a student today, if that makes sense. We think we've got the delivery program nailed, but could that extend into a more academic field? Yes, maybe. I think actually we want this to be, we know I'm not being critical of current programs, but we want this to be a really practical, based in the sector experience. So we've had a few nominations from people who are actually studying at the moment. That's fantastic, because they will also be future leaders of the future.
Excellent. And I think you've sort of touched on, there's a couple of questions from Laura Bishop we could pick up quickly. One, can young people nominate themselves to join the scheme? Do they need someone to nominate them? And similar vein, can someone join the scheme if they're not currently working in the low carbon sector but would like to? So can young people nominate themselves? Can someone who's not in low carbon but would like to work in it join it? So hands up, anybody, fire away. These are the quick fire ones, and then you answer these, you might avoid answering one of the bigger ones later on, which might be in your interest. Richard.
I think on well, the second one for me, Jim, on the not from the low carbon sector, I'd say definitely, because the climate change is going to affect everybody and everywhere. So the stuff that we think is vogue now, the stuff that we think is that's to do with eco warriors and people who are minded around this, it's affecting every part of society now. So we need people from every part of society to contribute, and that cross section, that juxtaposition of perspective will contribute to the value of the program. If the program is just for people who have a passion for low carbon energy, then I think we're limiting the potential of what the program can deliver.
And the other one was about, can young people nominate themselves? I guess implied there is, do you need your employer to put you forward, or can they nominate themselves, I guess?
Ian, I think you got.
Yeah, yes. We expect this to grow in the telling, and we hope that as the cohorts start to happen, their networks, they're better at social media, as we've already talked about, than we are. So we expect them to connect, the cohorts to connect with other future leaders from every walk of life. So absolutely, yes, they can put themselves forward. I think leadership needs fostering, needs mentors, needs support. So ideally, you've got someone who's got your back, who's supporting you. So I'm really keen. I've identified a couple of future leaders that are currently working in MCS, and I'm their sponsor because I think they'll be fantastic leaders of the future. I keep saying future leaders of the future, but you know what I mean.
Exactly. Right.
So the ideal. Yeah.
Perfect. So those are the quick fire ones. Now let's take a couple of meaty ones here. So Mark Lovett, he says, I wonder if the focus you're placing on leadership places too much emphasis on the few. Strikes me this issue is about galvanizing the many. Perhaps what is required is leadership to enable and generate a social movement. So I guess he's asking about elitism. Lee, How do you take that one?
Yeah, I actually don't think we are focusing on the few. I think what we're trying to do is really open it up and break down some barriers. Often you end up on a leadership course after you've already embarked on your kind of leadership journey, or you're in a position of influence. And this is really about changing some of that. And it's back to what I said about diversity. The aim for us really is to create that networks, that partnerships. We want this to kind of go viral afterwards, in that people are understanding how climate change and how leadership going harmoniously affects every single sector and network out there. So it's an absolutely very open door. We want to appeal to, as I said, those smaller businesses, to the big businesses. There are those that will back other leadership programs and do their own bespoke things, but they won't be able to bring the kind of networks and the experiences that we're trying to bring together here, because it's built from within. It's by having that richness of cohorts of different society, different people coming together, that it will absolutely open eyes to say, actually, we're trying to deal with the same problems, just in different languages and from different positions. And bringing that collaboration together will get integrated solutions and accelerate some of the challenges that we're facing in climate change.
Excellent, good answer. And we've got a couple of nice questions here. Really, I think they're about, is the future another country? Is it somewhere else? So we've got one about, will leaders of the future be different? If so, is it predictable? And an allied one, if you like, asking, how will future leaders make the difference that would not happen otherwise? So really, is the future a different place? Two good questions there. So will leaders be different? That's William Davies asking. And Clive Sillins asks, how will future leaders make the difference? So is it a lazy assumption that the future's different and somewhere else, and therefore the needs are different?
I'll have a quick go, Jim, and I know Richard will jump in, so forgive us if we bounce around a little bit. The etiquette of Zoom. I think, will future leaders be different? Leadership will need to be the same. We need leaders and we need people, and it's passion and enthusiasm and, networks and knowledge and all of those things. The problems you will face as leaders will be slightly different. The problems of today are different than they were 20 years ago in many aspects. Look at all the technology that we're dealing with, and the fact that we've got this forum compared to other forums that we would have had then. So the problems we face will be slightly different. And what's great about this program is we have understanding of some of those problems, what they're emergent like. We know the climate is changing, that the weather patterns are more erratic. We've had the hottest, the wettest, the coldest, the driest. A lot of my role is about that, floods and fires and all of those aspects of it. So we've got that foresight to look at what's the policies, the legislations that are coming through, what's the patterns and looking like, where's the ambition to be, where does that not align? And that's where we're trying to then get the future leaders to understand the problems that we face, and then bring in that wealth of understanding and experience of individual sectors to say, what does that mean then to my business? What does that mean to everything else? So leadership will always be the problem, and it has been there for a while, and it'll also be the solution. It will just face different problems, and that's what we're trying to bring here with this focus.
I think, Jim, if I can, I'll probably say a bit of the same as they in a different way, actually, but I'd agree. I personally think leadership is leadership. You can break it down, and we can break it into ingredients. The thing that differs is the context. So leadership from 100 years ago will be very different to leadership in 100 years' time, or 10 years ago and in 10 years' time, if you look at the changes that are happening, and we haven't got time to start listing those and going into them. But I think in terms of how to go forward, clearly with my brand and my background, the whole navigation metaphor is the thing I like. So how do we get from here to there? If we play with that metaphor of the sailors who discovered the new world, they didn't really know what was going to be there. And in the same way, we don't really know what's going to be ahead of us with climate change. Is 2050 the right number? Is it too soon? Is it too late? What we need to do is start the journey. And my privilege as a navigator is to help people find the way and equip them to do so as best they can. Excellent.
And actually, I think one of these questions here, Richard, might also be for you from the point of view, I think you mentioned about the projects that the programme might bring forward. And Jess Hardwick asks, have you got any examples or ideas for the sorts of projects you'd expect to see delivered as part of phase 2? So nice question, picking up on what you described in terms of the
Yeah,
program.
I'll kick off then. I know Ian might have some ideas on that. I think the danger is if we come up with a prescription and a list saying we want these things fixed, then we're putting people in a box and we're limiting their ability to think differently. So the first invitation will be to participants to bring their own ideas and thoughts, and because if they're in, especially if they're in the sector, but if it's going to affect their future, that will motivate them more than being told by some old bloke what is expected. But we will have developing a short list of ideas. We think actually we do need to, one of the values is results, so we do need to be doing activities and projects that will lead us towards carbon zero. So that's definitely in our minds. But I'm reluctant to give a prescribed list and certainly advertise it broadly, because then people can sort of cherry pick rather than say, this is what I bring and this is what I'm passionate about changing.
Ian, you're nodding, and I think you've got your pen up there. Permission to speak.
You must be serious.
Fire away.
Must be serious. Yeah, maybe just turn that around a bit. I think we are most passionate when we're fully invested in something. So we do have some really quite interesting ideas, wicked problems, as Lee would say, to give to this cohort. But we want them to be invested in it, and they may have ideas of the kinds of problems they want to solve together. But I would also say that I've been overwhelmed actually by the level of interest, and thank you for people for joining today. I can see some of the people who said, you know, my organisation, my leadership, I've got a story to tell. And I've got a really wicked problem of my own. So we could be quite prescriptive and say, well, Ian Rippin's problems today, his leadership challenges are these. I could probably list them now and we'd all fall asleep. But you know, there are organisations out there that are facing major challenges, really wicked problems, and this new voice in low carbon. Let's ask them. Let's get them thinking about some of these issues that face policy, industry, diversity, all sorts of things that we want to give this Future Leaders programme.
Right, thank you. And I've got a nice question here from Johnny Sadler, and I'll ask this perhaps in two ways. One of the people in front of me on the panel, but he says, great initiative, thank you very much. As current leaders, will those running the programme open themselves up to constructive criticism and new ideas from the participating future leaders? And actually, I think as well as having a bit of fun with you, I think there's a good question about whether the future leaders of tomorrow are the disruptors of today. So I think there's a nice question in there as to if they're change makers, you know, well, change isn't always comfortable. Change can be painful too. So there you go. Are you open to criticism, and are you welcoming disruptors and new thinking? I think we've already said that.
I can.
Sorry, Rich. I'm just desperate to say.
On,
you know, I hope so. I mean, that's the expectation. We want them to. I think humility is really important in leadership, and actually, that in the spirit of that. My expectation is that this group is disruptive in terms of great new thinking, ambition. You know, we need to be on our toes. We're in these roles for just a short period of time. And we need, as I said at the beginning, we've got an obligation to foster the next generation of leaders. And that's what the three of us are really passionate about. So what comes with that is, you know, we expect to be criticised, engaged. Yeah.
Excellent. And I know, Richard, you're chomping at the bit, but shall I bring Lee in there just for devilment, just to make you wait? Lee,
yeah,
jump in just so that Richard has to wait.
Well done, Jim. My answer to that is absolutely no. But part of the because we want that diversity, that breadth, that new ideas, that new thinking. Because just doing the same things in the same way and expecting different outcomes, we all know that kind of analogy. But the real bit for me is, and this might be slightly provocative, you know, but there are lots of passion about climate change and wanting to make a difference, and the youth of today, and we've seen, so you know, the Gretas and others that are making a voice well heard, and that's wonderful. But there's a lot of passion in the current leadership now, equal, but they face a lot of problems that aren't quite visible. So this program will also help bring that passion and that ideas and the disruptiveness into the real world of the problems of what they are now, and how would you solve it, and how could you solve it, and make it real. So it's not just waving a placard, it's actually getting your hands dirty and getting involved with some of this. We're going to connect some of those things up, and that's where we will get out of it a little bit of great, some innovation, some new energy, some new ideas from places that we might not have looked at before. And in that conversation, we're giving leadership support and enthusiasm and inspiration to those people who are coming through in that field.
Excellent, good point. And it's about listening leaders as well, isn't it? And that's something Zoom etiquette can teach us about, especially if there's a delay. So Richard, finally, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jim. The energy behind the three of us in particular coming together this program is if we knew what the answer was, we wouldn't be doing the program. We wouldn't need to. So we know that we don't know the way forward. My mindset and attitude often with some of the programs I've led in the past, new initiatives I've done in the past, is let's do it and find out how we should have done it, rather than procrastinating, rather than deliberating, rather than thinking, let's wait till we've got the right solution. So we're going into this with the sleeves rolled up. We want to jump in at the deep end in some respect. And people who know me and have heard me say these things before, my three favourite leadership qualities are humility, courage and determination. Ian's already mentioned humility. We don't have the answers, but we're really keen to find the people who do or who can contribute. We need courage because there's uncertainty, there's ambiguity, and for leaders to go forward in that. There's not an absence of fear that allows courage to take place. Courage is what you do when there is fear. And then determination is just to get stuck in and see it through. And yeah, there will be bumpy bits, but I agree with the other two. We welcome disruptors, we welcome that challenge, because if they're right, we need to listen to them. If they're wrong, the noise will pass. That's fine.
Absolutely, good point. And we've got a quite specific question from Alex Falconer. Asks, what about the timetabling considerations of being a part of this program? Specific one.
Shall I mention?
Yeah, Richard, if you want to.
It's quite practical, isn't it? So the first 3 months, it's kind of 2 mornings sessions every 3 weeks is the rough cadence of it. So you'll sort of do 40 hours of contact time, if you like, over that 3 months. And then in the second 6 months, it's a day a month, again, of contact time where we come together as a group. So hopefully that's very, not so much flexible, but there's limited commitment from the individual to take them away from their day job. So hopefully employers who get this and support it will be happy to allow the people to participate in that regard. And then as much as they can do around that as they want to.
To add to that, Jim, actually, this is an investment and should be seen as, you're making a commitment to either your own career development and progression, or your employer or your sponsor, whoever is saying, I want to help you achieve your goals. So I went on a leadership program and they told me at the beginning that I'd need to find 20 days in that following year for my development. And I thought, oh, there's no chance of that. There's no way I'll do that. And I did that and more. And then the challenge then is to keep that going so that you continually invest in your knowledge and your skills and your abilities going forward. So, I think this is an investment. So yes, we're making it as easy as possible to engage with, but you've really got to want to be on this program. This isn't about time, really. It's about making that investment.
Sorry, Jim, can I just come back in as well on that, just to emphasize it? I think what I often say to people on my programs, if you read medicine, if you're a doctor, then you read the Lancet, you keep up to date. If you are a lawyer, you read law, you spend time developing your professional practice. And what I think is often missing is, if you're a leader, how do you develop your professional practice? You need to spend a chunk of your time, a percentage of your time, developing yourself, your people, your organization. So this isn't just a case of, I'll do it if I can fit it into other things. It's actually, how do we turn this around into a priority? So as Ian says, you start to generate more time and space to lead even better.
Excellent. Yeah, learning and listening, you've got to stay hungry. And there's a couple of questions I'm going to combine kind of from Clive Sillins again. He's asked, obviously it's not a lobbying organization, but he has asked, are you expecting future leaders to be an influencing factor on government thinking? And allied to that, he's asked about, where will the funding come from to make sustainable climate change and net zero objectives happen? And we have to acknowledge that this isn't taking place in a vacuum. It's in a context, and there are economics and there are politics, and having a voice. Often the sector's been criticised for not having a voice, or definitely not having a unified voice, or not having a range of voices to make itself heard and maybe get the ear of government or whoever it may be. So are future leaders going to help influence government thinking and effectively where the money comes from? Lee?
So yes, I would say absolutely, because where do these future leaders then go? They're ideal with lots of sector groups across the country. You know, there are sectors that can do that and go lobbying. My organisation is an arm's length body of government. We don't lobby, we just put the kind of facts up. So the aim of this programme is to help upskill and give the right level of information and facts to organisations so that you can have a better voice for that influence of where that will be, and how if lobbying is the right word, or just actually telling the story of the problems that are being faced at the moment. The second question about the funding, it's always an interesting one. So funding is going to be really difficult. You know, if it was going to be difficult before COVID, it is going to be even more difficult afterwards. Now, all the spending reviews are just happening at the moment, and there is no central government that's going to bail this out. But that's really a warning shot as well. And it's a reality that we all have to face up. The size of climate change is going to be massive. We're talking about, you know, sea level rises, temperature increases, the impact that will have on the health service. If we manage to keep at 2 degrees C, great. But that 2 degrees C is a global temperature. That'll be about 6 or 7 degrees in city centres where we have heat islands, the heat island effect. And that will cause higher death rates, etc. So the spending bill of climate change is going to be huge. Governments don't have the money to do it. It's going to take an integrated everybody effort to do so. However, there is a return of investment coming on this. So we know, for example, innovation is really key. Those businesses that are thinking ahead, thinking about long-term sustainability, thinking about what the shape and size of their industry will be in a climate world, they're acting now and seeking the support to drive some of that initiative where there is some government funding to do so, or the sectors are driving it themselves, because it gives an economic edge. It gives them an advantage in their markets, in their networks to do so. We also know things like moving away from fossil fuels. So it's obvious all the coal-fired power stations are coming down. You know, where do gas-fired come in the future? What's the gas network? There's conversations about hydrogen networks. I don't actually foresee we're going to replace the entire gas network with hydrogen. Putting a highly volatile gas underneath the floors of everybody is probably not going to be there. But the electric world will get more and more prevalent. So solar and wind and nuclear. So what does the electrification of our country look like to your sectors? What does that kind of mean? The cost of electric will start to come down as that innovation comes through. So sectors, industries are going to end up having to adapt and pay for some of this going forward. We can't rely on a central government pot to bail everybody out of some of this because it's just too big a problem. So where the funding comes from is where we need good leadership and identifying some of these problems, identifying what it means to your sector, identifying then what opportunities and where you're going to get that, rather than just, well, we'll assume somebody will come along and give us the money for it. That ain't going to be there in every case. Excellent.
And I think, and I should, of course, mention that Elemental, there are a whole range of great webinars already on demand and coming up on exactly decarbonisation, electrification, hydrogen economy. If you're interested in any of those topics, have a look and check out what's already broadcast and what's coming through too. We've kind of, you nicely there picked up, Lee, a little bit of a question from William Davis, who made a nice comment about improving diversity is about what happens before selection, education, information, etc., and after selection, culture. What can be specifically done in this sector to strategically address? Now, I also thought it was interesting to take that question. We've discussed the diversity issue, but also the idea of culture, business culture, industry culture, and without being flip, is climate change or climate, is it actually an opportunity, a really dynamic culture change opportunity for this industry? I wonder if you'd just like to add a comment on, you know, is climate the vehicle to some degree for a more progressive and a more modern culture in our industry?
Wow.
Just a little easy one at the end there.
Yeah, I didn't expect that on a lunchtime. But it could be, couldn't it? It really could be.
I'm just putting it out there really, but I think it is a dynamic opportunity, and we can look at it in that respect. I feel
what it crosses boundaries, of course, and it affects everybody from every walk of life. So if it acts as a catalyst for people to come together, and you know, to some extent, our ambition for future leaders is precisely that. So if it acts as a catalyst to focus minds, bring the latest thinking together, and we instill some great leadership skills on top of all of that, then absolutely it's an opportunity. It's scary as hell for all the reasons that Lee's just articulated, but I think future leaders like big problems to get their teeth into, start to work through visions of the future that they can inspire others to get this.
absolutely.
So it could be the catalyst.
I think I'd add, Jim, it's a bit of standing on the shoulders, combined with other initiatives that are going on at the moment. You know, there will not be a desire to recover from EU exit and COVID in an unsustainable way. You know, we need sustainability there. So the green recovery aspect is key. But you can't do green recovery in isolation without looking at social equality. The social equality key. You can't just you know, regenerate the wealthy areas. We've got to do that because we're also on a global scale. So we are trend setting here in the UK. We are really trying to do even more than others are, so that we can then lift and transcribe that into other countries around the world. A lot of my work is on a global scale as well. So if we can do it here, the home of the Industrial Revolution, the legacy and the history that we've got, plus the privilege that we've got, given being the 5th richest country in the world, then really we should be able to transcribe that as to solutions on a global scale. And that's the driver coming through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which will become a much more global currency going forward. Now, that's a very grand answer to it, but it does mean, what does that mean then to every single business and industry in this country? They will have to have a narrative around that. Ultimately, it's risk management. How do you minimize and reduce the risks that might threaten your industry going forward? First, you've got to know what those risks are. And that's what we're trying to bring to life on this.
Excellent. And it's turning that UN SDGs aspiration into actionable insights on a Monday morning. Perfect. And I wonder, Eoin McManus, who, if I could top and tail it, bringing you back in, I've got one final question, just picking up on that really. We've obviously talked a lot about bringing forward future leaders, individuals from within the sector and the industry. But I just wondered if you wanted to say a word about the potential for the whole community collectively, as serviced by Elemental and Installer, to assume leadership in the drive to build back better. You know, so future leaders within a community that is itself leading on some of these things. And I wondered if you just perhaps like to give us a final comment on the whole collective industry's opportunity to assume leadership here.
I think the industry does see the whole net zero challenges is something that's terribly ambitious, but also something that's you know, will advance their businesses. And I think the industry, you know, if you're talking about manufacturers and actually practitioners within the industry, they are very keen to engage the development of net zero. Obviously, it's good for business and it's the way forward. But I do think if we get back to, you know, the idea of leadership here, and one of the things that came up in the conversation that I quite struck was by the disruptors, you know, and you could argue that I think, you know, disruptors in some cases make great leaders, you know, and I think where the industry needs to be challenged is in how, you know, the status quo, and how can we move change, and how can we develop technologies and develop thinking, because it's not just about, this isn't just about a change within an organization. This is a change within our world. And so the communication aspect of it is massive as well, because not only do you have to get the industries aligned with it, you also have to get the public aligned with it, because obviously it affects their lives. And this is the key thing. This is a huge challenge going forward for us. And this is where, you know, as a media brand, it's very good. It's very important that we kind of challenge, you know, challenge the status quo, but challenge what people are saying. And how this is actually progressing. And I think, you know, I think we welcome, and we were doing the talk about back to the disruptors, and we were organizing the seminar program, the debate program for Elemental as the live event. And one of the key areas that we looked at was actually getting disruptors to the event so that we could actually get them to question and to challenge some of the things that were actually being said on the, because unless we do that, I'm not sure we've had a rounded debate, you know. So I think this is all great stuff, and I thank everybody for their participation.
Great, thanks for that, Eoin. Absolutely, it's engaging those critical friends. We've got a few more questions we won't have time for today. I hope these people will join some of the upcoming sessions. I particularly note Gerald Asbrook, who's got in touch from Australia, and Jodie's got a string of questions about all matters off grid and such. Well, hopefully, Gerald, you'll tune into some of the future sessions as well, and we can engage with yourself. So thank you very much. In closing, big thank you to all our panelists, Eoin, Lee, Richard, and of course, Eoin from Elemental. To yourselves out there in Zoom land, our virtual audience, for your comments and your many questions. Excellent, thank you. Reminder to check out Elemental, www.elementalexpo.com, online community for professionals focused on innovation in heat, water, air, and energy, the vital elements within the built environment now and in the future. As I said at the top, you'll find the full diary of events on the website. You'll also see a tab for future leaders. You can check out all the information there and the back catalogue of recent sessions, loads of good stuff available to watch on demand, free, I hasten to add. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for everybody on the panel. Thank you for your questions. I've been Jim McClelland, editor at SustMeme. Thanks for watching. See you all again soon. Cheerio.